Good afternoon. Welcome to the product update. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Richard Saunders. I'm the Senior Product and Design Manager here at Zengenti, and I help set the roadmap for Contensis and involved in design across the business, but mainly around with product focus. So I'm going to kick straight off today, and I want to touch on forms. Forms is a fundamental need in most websites now. The need to interact with your customers or potential customers, whether that be universities, citizens of a local area. And forms have been part of Contensis for a good number of years. Those of you who are classic Contensis users will be aware of the classic forms module that we have, and it served our customers really, really well. We've got thousands upon thousands of forms across our cloud platform, hundreds of thousands of responses used in all sorts of different ways in different environments. But we're getting to the stage now where forms isn't really doing what it needs to do for the future. We want to bring forms into Contensis Modern in a way that enables better integration, better extensibility, and just putting you all in one interface that you're used to using. So the advantages of us bringing over forms to Contensis, Contensis Modern, familiar interface to build these forms, getting data through different types of workflow, supporting webhooks, supporting integrations with the likes of Zapier, and moving content around different systems in the way that you'd anticipate in a modern sort of tech stack. So in Contensis 16.1, we're going to be introducing a new forms builder and forms responsives and form responses, enabling you to create forms, surveys, and questionnaires. It'll compile over no-code form builder with easy to build forms using the drag and drop interface. If you're used to content types and entries, maybe you don't necessarily build content types, but this we've utilized the content type builder and refactored it for forms. So you'll be used to laying out a form in the way that you want, using the similar tools that you've used previously in content types. So as you can see here, we've got a bunch of form fields that can be dropped into the center column. And we support a wide range of form fields here. We don't quite yet have the same matching up with Contensis Classic, but we will be extending those shortly. But we have taken the data across all of our forms across the cloud platform to understand what the majority of those form fields are. So yeah, you'll see the majority of the form fields you're going to use on a form by form basis in the forms toolbox. We also support form validation, so the ability to set required fields, the ability to do character count, regular expression pattern matching, making sure a number value is in a particular range. And that comes through to a form in the way that you'd expect it to. Clear validation messages, clearly indicating validation summaries at the top of the screen, and scroll to those problem areas that you haven't necessarily dealt with. The forms builder and our forms render will support multi-page forms, enabling you to organize long, complex forms into multiple pages. And we do that using the tabs at the top of the screen. Now you can add a page in the top tab toolbar, give your page a name and a description, which is used to display in the front end form. The new forms builder also supports confirmation rules. So not only can you display a single confirmation message for anybody who submits a form, but based on the data that's being populated within the form, gives you the ability to set different confirmation messages. So you can set up these different conditional rules. As you can see in this one, when the inquiry type is equal to general inquiry, so this is a form on a front-end site that's got a drop-down, what type of inquiry are you making? We can display a different message from those maybe who are doing maybe a freedom of information request. And I'll go through this more in the demo. We also support sending conditional notification emails based on that content as well. So if you wanted to do a freedom of information request email, you might say, we've got 20 days to respond to your freedom of information request and provide maybe the form reference number and the expected date. So yeah, same rules builder within notifications email as there are in confirmation messages. There are also times when you produce a form, maybe for an event registration, and you want that form to expire at a particular date and time, where no more forms can be populated, or nobody else can respond or sign up for that event. So we're supporting expiration dates within forms with a date and time, where you can also set a custom closure message so respondents understand, maybe if they've been shared a link to the page where the form is, it would now display that in this case the registration for the open day has been closed. And you can also manually disable forms if you need to. When you're building a form, you're going to want to preview and test your form like you do with any content and make sure the flow of your form is working as anticipated. So we've got a custom form preview as you're building up your form, clearly indicating that the form data won't be collected as part of the preview. But this will allow you to test your form and validate it's got all the data fields that you want, that you're providing the correct validation messages, and the page-by-page sectioning names and descriptions are all valid. And when you've tested your form, we'll present you with that form data in a way to confirm this is what would happen in a real life situation. So here we're seeing the confirmation message that will be displayed based on the confirmation rules that have been set, and the same with email notification, and the form response data will also be returned. So you get a real sense of being able to test your form before it goes live or before you make it available to everyone. We also support the ability to set a form to autosave. So previously, if you were dealing with a multi-page form, you would have to submit that form and just take all that time to do it. And you know what life's like, life's busy. You start filling in a form, you walk away to do something else, you accidentally close a browser tab and you think, oh, I just want to come back and populate that form. Well, with autosave enabled on a form, if somebody does accidentally close their browser window or they come away from their screen and come back to it the next day, the form fields they've already populated are automatically saved so that it can go back in and continue filling out that form where they left off. That data is not permanent. Once the user's browser local storage has been cleared or an expiration date has been met, then that data will clear from their browser. And we've also, as we worked on forms, looked at the permissions that are available. Now, if you're used to building content types today, you'll know that you need to be a content type administrator in order to create a content type. And we felt this was like really limiting people who'd want to control who can create and manage forms, or maybe create and manage an individual form or 2 or 3 forms in a project. So now you can define form administrators or administrators for 1 or 2 forms from the roles builder. So you can add the forms permission type, you can say whether it's all forms or a selection of individual forms, and then set the actions that can apply to that. So you've got full granular control of who can create, update, and delete these forms in the CMS, and they'll only see the ones that they have permission to. So that's the builder. So that enables you to kind of build, preview the form. Once a form is on a site, which we'll touch on in a little bit, obviously that data that is submitted needs to come into the content management system for you to be able to review it, action it, push it through different types of workflow, or just action that data that's coming through. So again, you can control who can view the form responses. So you might have somebody who's responsible for creating the form, but other people might need to manage those responses. And we support view permissions now. So you can isolate one form to a group of people, and they'll never see the form responses of other forms in the system. So you've got the same granular control as I showed you previously. Once you're viewing form responses for a given form, you can filter those by keyword, their workflow state that they're in. We've introduced a date range filter and the ability to filter form responses that have been assigned to particular individuals. The other thing that you'll often find with forms is when you submit a form, you're often given a reference ID to have something that can be easily looked up if you needed to make contact. So if you're doing an open day form, you might want the student recruitment services to be able to look up a form by a unique reference number. And we support unique reference numbers on form responses now. These can be slightly customized with a little prefix, which is generated from the form name, and that can be amended, but that gives I think it's a 9-digit unique reference number that can be easily called up if people need to. Forms support workflow like entries do, and we've created a simple read and unread workflow within form responses. And you can also assign an individual team member to be responsible for handling a particular response. And when that is set, a user would be emailed to say, you've been assigned this form response to handle and deal with. When you're dealing with form responses, you might have many a day. If you're working on an open day registration of people who are coming along, you might be opening many forms, and what we want you to be able to do is to easily cycle through those. So we've added some extra navigation into the viewer where you can cycle through all those responses without coming back to a listing to view the content, just to make that flow a little bit easier. And we support CSV export, so you can export audio responses to CSV, the page of results that you've currently got in front of you, based on the search criteria that you've set. And the data that will be exported to CSV is the data that's presented by the managed columns. By default, you'll see all the columns of data for a given form in the response listing. And to be GDPR compliant as well, we want to ensure that responses aren't kept for longer than necessary. So we have a default on a project of 30 days to keep form responses, and this can be customized on a per form basis as well. So you can override that, and you can override the project default for 30 days. And you can also archive responses. So there are times where you want to keep that data and refer to it at a later date, and you can do that using the archive function. So let's not talk about forms. Let's go and take a look. So let's go over to Contensis. Once you've been given permissions to forms, you'll see a new forms option in the sidebar. And just to see what those permissions look like, we can go into roles now. I've got my form administrator's role, which is just saying anyone in this role can manage any type of form. So I've got it set to all forms at the moment, and I've got it all actions. But it could be that I might want this to be form editors, so I want them to be able to update and publish the changes to their form. But I don't want them creating any more, and I don't want them to delete the forms. So I'll keep that permission in place. And this is the same place that you'll set the form responses. So if this administrator can create forms, we might say they're only allowed to see responses for demo requests. We want them to be able to view them. We want them to be able to change the workflow to read and unread. And we might want them to be able to archive and unarchive them. So all that can be set within the roles builder itself. As for forms, you'll see that we've got two options here when the sidebar's opened. And again, these items in the menu will only be displayed based on your permissions. So we'll start off with the forms builder. We'll look at a basic form and then take you through a more complex scenario. So I quickly replicated a form that we use on Contensis.com as an initial explainer. So here on this demo page, we've got a form that is requiring name, email address, organization, and phone number, which are optional fields, and a simple submit button. So if we look at the forms builder, I've got this demo request. And if I go into that form now, you can see that form's made up of a series of 5 form fields. Now, these form fields have just been inserted from this left-hand toolbar, and we've tried to come up with sensible defaults of validation and such. Behind the scenes, for the developers on the call, we've also introduced new data formats for some of these data types that we're collecting data for. So traditionally, if you were capturing a short text field, it would just be a text string. Now, when we come to email addresses and URLs, we actually want to understand what that data is. So we have things like data format of email now, data format of URL, and data format of telephone number. And these will be extended over into content types in time, but they're in forms at the moment. So we've got a simple text field. The validation is set saying it's required. And I've presented a custom validation message if somebody forgets to put it in, saying, please provide your full name. Validation for email addresses, we auto check an expression that it's a valid email address. So you don't see the matches pattern here. We've handled that for you. And these fields have no validation applied. I've also got a Boolean or a yes, no question here to use for like an email marketing opt-in, just to kind of, yes, I'd like to be sent email marketing communications by email. And under the advanced tab, you can see that I've got some extra information that will be displayed before that form field. So let's just take a look at what this looks like. What you're seeing here now is the initial preview. This is a CMS preview of this form, not quite as you saw it in the designs in the keynote. There's a few changes left to make in this screen. But this is the preview version of a form. Now, the way that this has been rendered here for the preview will be the actual way you can render this form in your site with maybe a different theme applied to it, or through a shared URL. So what you're seeing in here is how that form may actually just be rendered to a user. Now, if I try to submit the data, obviously it's expecting certain email and name field here, and we support the default kind of verification summary. This is all kind of WCAG 2.2 compliant in terms of ensuring things are clearly labeled, clearly read out when errors are displayed. You can see here in the title bar that we've got error added to the page title, so that screen readers are informed that that there is an error in the form that you're populating. So when I just populate this with my details, I'll say yes to this one and submit, and you just see a really basic message here. Okay, so that's a basic form. Now, on the right-hand side here, you can see a variety of new options in this builder. We've got this new toolbar on the right-hand side. And this has been updated in both the content type builder, the components builder, and in the forms builder now. So settings are in a consistent place. We used to hide the properties or the settings up in this more actions menu. So we've moved it down into this vertical toolbar to give better visibility. And from here, you can set all the properties of this form. So workflow, what the previous and next button should be, who should be notified internally when a form response is received. The options around autosave and disabling are all found within this panel. And for the confirmation message that we just saw on that form preview, and this one here, thank you, your demo request has been sent. That is being powered by this confirmation rules panel. And this is a really basic message. So you can either show a confirmation message, redirect to a site view location, or redirect to a URL. And this field here is a canvas field. And so you've got flexibility here in what content is presented in that confirmation. But we've also got this idea of conditional rules. So displaying different messages based on the content that somebody has submitted in a form. And to demonstrate that, I'm just going to show you a different form to give you a bit more of an overview. So let's go back to forms. And this form I'm going to show you is this contact form. Really simple form again. And this type of contact form you see in all sorts of different sites. And it's often just a name, email address, maybe a message, but also the ability to set the type of inquiry that this form is. In this case, we're using this inquiry type. We're using this drop-down value. Now, if I look at the properties for this drop-down value, this bit is a work in progress, but what you will see now, in fact, the localization has dropped this afternoon. What we've got here is key value pairs. So currently in existing forms, you just had a really simple static list of values. So you might have had red, green, blue, or in this case, we've got general inquiry and freedom of information request. And we've been asked to provide both a label and the ability to select a different value that's saved in code on the front end. So we now support that with a label and value field. So we've got two different types here. So back to confirmation rules. So somebody comes to this, let's take a look at it, comes to this form, they populate their name, their email address, and then what's their inquiry about? Well, in this really basic example I've got, it's a general inquiry, or I've got an FOI request that I want to make. So from here now, I can say in my confirmation rules, I've got two rules set up here. So when the inquiry type is set to general inquiry, present the user with this message. And if it's an FOI request, present this message. So one form can provide data collection for multiple scenarios, and then you can send different messages when people have populated it, and in the email notifications, send them a different type of response. One of the nice things about this confirmation rules, you can actually pull data in that's in the form. So here we're using this syntax, which if you've used our webhook screen, is liquid syntax. So we're just using the name of the field. So we're saying, hi, Richard, in this case. As your inquiries of a general nature, please allow up to 7 days. And then I'm outputting the reference number. Now, this is the unique reference number that I referred to earlier on, that we can surface in a message. And the same here, slightly different message, normally 7 days to respond, but in an FOI request, I've got 20 working days to deal with that response. So I can display that different message. So if I fill this in now, and I say FOI request, won't put a message or just put test in here. I click on the submit. You can see that that FOI request confirmation message has been displayed. And here the unique reference number. The CF came from the contact form. So when the form was created, it used the first character of the form. If you look in form settings, you can see that prefix here. You can update this prefix. So if you want to change it, you can. Just change that to cap it up. So every form now will be prefixed with CF rather than C lowercase f. So that was a conditional form. We changed the drop down to FOI request. We submitted the form and the form response came back with a confirmation message that was specific to FOI requests. So that's creating a form, viewing conditional rules. And from there, then now we can look at the form responses. So let's look at responses for these forms. And let's take a look at this. Start with the demo request because it's got some more data in there. So this listing will seem familiar. It's very much like the entries listing. But it's scoped to only display the responses for this given form, e.g. the demo request form. And your permissions will dictate which of these forms you'll see. So if, like we saw earlier in the role screen, I was only allowed to look at project inquiry. Project inquiry is the only one that would appear here in my list. I'm set up as a system admin at the moment, so I can see all of these, but let's go back into these form responses. So in the reference field, we see this unique reference number and all the form fields that we populated are displayed here in the listing. And you can see that some of these form responses have been actioned, and we can filter by them here in the left-hand side, like we would do in entries. We've also introduced a new date range picker, so we can see form responses that have come in this week, and that's just going to make it easier when you're looking for a particular range. And you can search by keywords, so it will search all the columns for particular data that you're looking for. So that's the listing with the search. From here, you might just want to take this data out into another system. And to do that, you can export this content as a CSV file. So go to table options, export as CSV. In this case, I've only got a single page of data, so it's exported all of the data. And if I open this up, put it on the right screen so you can see it. He says, keynote. You can see that this CSV file has been downloaded, and the data that's presented is what was in the columns that have been displayed. Now, if I change the columns in this view and do an export again, it will drop off those columns that I have included. So I don't want the assigned to. Maybe I'll have drop the organization. So now when I do an export, the data will reflect what's in there. I'm going to open this into full screen. Switch across. So there we are. That data is different than the other data that we just downloaded. So you can control your CSV export by turning on the columns, rearranging the columns into the way that you want, using filters to filter down that content to represent just maybe you were just looking for the ones that are unread rather than the ones that are read, and being able to get that data out maybe into a third-party system. So that's the listing, and that's some of the features there. If you open up the response, we've got a different view now than we would have had in the entry editor. So you're seeing a read-only view of this data, summarizing it, of which you can copy any of this data to the clipboard. And here's the new navigation, allowing you to easily cycle through all your different form responses and then action them. So in this case, you could mark this one as read. You may have dealt with it and carry on. Now, things that we hope to add to this, just to make you aware, we haven't added commenting in at the moment, but we do plan to introduce commenting in the future. So be able to comment on the entire response and maybe down to field level. We've just not made that kind of final decision on that area at the moment. And you'll also be able to assign this response to an individual user. You'll basically be able to select from a list here. So we can see I want to assign this to Dan. And when I click assign now, Dan is assigned as the person responsible. He will receive an email to say, this form response has been assigned to you. And when we go to manage columns and I put the assignee back in, there's it gone. It's a system field, assigned to, and click on save. We can see now Dan is the person that's being responsible for this response. And if we were to do a filter by Dan as well, we'd see all of the content that he's got to deal with as well. So really nice kind of workflow of assigning users to particular pieces of content and being informed through email notifications. So that's the form response view. We've seen you being able to cycle through, export that content to CSV and assign particular users to handle different form responses. So I want to show you one more thing, and that's around pagination of forms. So if we go back in to the forms builder and we look at something like this project inquiry form. So you may offer services like we do with professional services, and you might want to put a quote thing on your website. In this case, I just want to capture some basic information. So I've got a page of tell us about yourself. And when we look at the page properties here, we can give a description on this field, on this page as well. And I've got project, what type of project is it? And from here, I've got a set of values, website, intranet, mobile application, or is it a content modeling project? And maybe I want to capture a bit more information about this project in the form of some project details. I might say, please provide your budget and timeframes and any information that would support consideration. This project, spell, save. Earlier on, I showed you that you could preview a form in like the latest mode. You can also preview the form as if this form was published. Now, I've just made a change to this field instruction. So if I preview the published version of this form and I get to the next page, it didn't press the published. I need to check on something. Oh no, this is the detail. So I've got no content guidelines, sorry, for project details. This text here has come from the page properties. So if I want to see that new localization that I've added here, these field instructions, if I preview latest and go to this page, you can now see those content guidelines. So you can have a form that is live. You can then subsequently make changes to that form and preview those changes before those changes go public. So this is really nice that you can kind of carry on making updates to it and see the changes and then update your form when you're ready. You might do this if you were sort of updating last year's maybe open day form and you want to change the date or change the values in the drop down. You can make those changes while your form is live, ready to publish the new version. What you'll also notice is some of this data is actually being populated. And this is because I started filling in this form previously. So I actually deleted my full name and info earlier. But if you go next, you can see that from my previous time I came here, it saved the website and content selection for the project. Now, if I close this and I preview it again, just preview published. I go next. You can see the options that I unticked earlier have now been saved because this form's got auto-saved enabled. And I can just go ahead and populate this content and I can update it. And it's got my message from previously that's been saved. This is a new message. So from here, we've seen that we've got a form that has multiple pages. The pages can have individual page descriptions, that you can have a latest version of the form and a published version of the form. And in this situation, this form has auto-saved enabled, which you can see on the form settings screen by here. And that's turned on, and that data will be saved in the user's browser for 15 days. So lots of flexibility within forms, and we're really excited because it's just going to enable people to capture the data they need in a familiar way and get that content into all sorts of different integrations that they may be interested in. And with that in mind, let's dive back over to Keynote and touch on a few other things. So it's great, we can build a form, we can preview a form, we've seen some data presented in the response viewer. How do we go about using forms in a site? Well, something we're still working on and haven't finalized whether it become part of the 16.1 release, but I wanted to share it with you. Our mindset is to create a forms builder that enables us to create forms that can both be embedded and utilized in a site, but also independent of a site. So being able to just share a form URL, a public form URL that can go out and anybody can create that form and populate that form without it necessarily being embedded in a page. As I said, we're still kind of finalizing those details as to whether that will form part of the 16.1 release. But the core way you'll handle forms today is inserting them into entries. So in the content type builder, we've introduced a new resource picker from the toolbox in the left-hand side. And this resource picker actually has two different types of picker. One is forms and one is content types, which I'll touch on briefly in a bit. But here we are, we've got the form added to a landing page content type. And here on the right-hand side, you can see that the following three forms will be presented to the user when they're building that landing page to say, which form do you want to be presented on here? And here's the modal for selecting those forms. So we saw the configuration in the content type builder. Here we are in the entry editor via site view, and we can see that we can choose one of those forms and add it to my entry. Forms will also support authentication, so you can have forms that are dedicated, maybe in an intranet, or where you are authenticated in your site for those forms to be populated. So keeping that data private rather than them being public forms. If you're using single sign-on in your site, being able to populate those responses with the data available for a user, such as name, email address, and such, as well as the content being able to be saved anonymously as well. There's not a slide in here, but we do plan to support anonymous submissions for those who are signed in or authenticated. Sometimes you might want to take an internal survey where you don't want to capture a user's real details, and so we're going to allow those forms to be submitted anonymously. So you can assign a form to an entry, whether that's just in a field, into a composer, into a component. But how do you get it? How do you get it displaying in your site? Well, I mentioned earlier on when we were looking at preview, what you are actually seeing is a render of the form based on our own render package, and we're making this render package available through npm. You can see the code behind it at our GitHub repo, and this package will handle all of the kind of heavy weight of managing forms on a front end for you. So things like field and page validation is handled out of the box. So from the simple things of character count to is this field required and has it been populated, to displaying the validation summary at the top of the page when there are errors. This also includes some really complex things like dates. We actually support a really rich way of handling date fields. So if you're used to using like gov.uk services, whilst in some situations they use like a month, day, year, or a day, month, year inputs, they also have the ability to use a text input and accept a silly amount of different variations of date and time. So you could type in there 27th of the 11th, 83, my date of birth, and put that in there, or you could put 27th of November, comma, 1983, and it would accept that. We've actually built in the same validation that gov.uk support, and I think there's about 512 different variations of date time input that are supported, and we handled all those out of the box for you. We also handle supporting that data, saving that data into local storage when you've got autosave switched on. And we've made the CSS that renders that form really clean using modern CSS techniques, and is using overridable CSS properties to make theming really, really easy. Again, this is an area that we want to see extended in the forms builder, where you can select the different themes from the builder itself when we come to sharing a form via a URL. But we're going to make this really straightforward in the render for you to update and customize to align with your brand and design system. We'll also handle Google reCAPTCHA for you. We're going to be using reCAPTCHA version 3, so it doesn't have the annoying choose which squares include traffic lights, or which one of these are shop fronts. It also doesn't produce the tick "I'm not a robot" option. It all does it through browser heuristics and understanding your domain, and that's going to be you can enable that on a per form basis if you wish. So that's some of the stuff around using the forms in your site, and making it easy to developers to get this up and running as quickly as possible. Touched on workflow. Obviously, once you get data into Contensis, what happens to it next? Well, you may want to use webhooks to start an integration that you're building yourself, and we'll support that on form submission. We'll also have support for Zapier, so the endpoints will be added to the Zap triggers and events, so you'll be able to create Zap templates or use the ones that we define. And you can create custom workflow. So like you can create custom workflow and entries. If you want to create a custom workflow for your customer inquiries, then you can do that by setting up a new form workflow. We've actually extended the workflow definition now to support this new form format. So that's the update on forms. So that plays a major part in the next version of Contensis. But that's not all. We come next on to enterprise audit. The ability for accountability and observability of what's going on in a Contensis instance. As you can imagine, in an enterprise product, you can have tons of people all doing different things in your organization, updating entries, changing settings, updating content types, forms, adding comments, all that type of stuff. Loads of actions take place every day, every minute in a system. So enterprise audit is going to be a system administrator role action where only system admins will be able to view audit. The audit screen actually shows your global view. So it shows you every project. Things like users and groups are global resources in Contensis. So you'll see all those changes as well. So it's a global view and it's found in environment settings in Contensis. You'll be able to filter by the different types of resources that you want to look at and who's made actions on that content. Like you saw in form responses, you'll also be able to export an audit trail to CSV with the same principles. The pages that are shown, the results, the search results that have been carried out, and what columns you've got displayed. So I can quickly show you that. And so, as I said, it's an environment related feature. So you'll see it under environment settings if you're a system admin, and you'll see audit there. Now, when you open up audit now, you'll see a whole range of actions that have taken place. Obviously, every service that interacts in Contensis has had to be updated to support these messages. We were storing this data in different ways across different resources, but there's a consistent approach now to this data capture. So some of these messages may change by the time we release as we work through all the different resource types. But you can see here, I've got this Leaf project. Has any changes been made in books recently? No. What about, let's just look at Leaf ones and let's look at maybe content type changes. So we can see all those, and these are all the actions that I've worked on, or some that Dan has made today. And again, we've got the date range filter here, so you can easily see that data. So you're getting an overview of everything that's been updated, been worked on, who it's been done by, and as additional services are added to Contensis, we'll add and enrich this data as well. So that's enterprise audit. What else have we been up to? And there's always a range of updates in Contensis every release. So like you saw with the form responses, you can assign a user to a form to deal with it and they'll be notified. The same thing will apply with entries. When you assign a new user to an entry to deal with it, they will receive an email, and the previous content owner will receive an email saying they're no longer the content owner. You'll get the benefits of this new export to CSV in entries and the advanced search screens as well. So that's not just dedicated to audit and form responses. It applies to other areas in Contensis. You can now enable and disable certificates that might not be in use or being problematic. So that can be done in the SSL screens. And the permissions that we set up for forms for you to be able to control who can create and manage a form is also coming to content types and component permissions as well. So previously, you would have global access across all projects with content type administrators and component administrators. These are now scoped at project level, so you can define who can create and manage components and content types in individual projects. And we've also been updating our notifications logic, and that's really so we can support both internal email notifications that you get today and sending these external ones for forms. And it's going to enable things like custom workflow notifications in time, as well as things like webhooks, when webhooks are being disabled, when API keys are being disabled and such, notifying individuals of those particular actions. I briefly showed you earlier that list fields now support label and values, and we've done this in such a way that when you upgrade, they'll continue to work as they have, so you shouldn't need to make any front-end changes. You'll just get the benefit of being able to have custom labels. So this is going to be really nice for things like if you've got a component on your front-end site, like a call to action component, and you want to say the button is my primary action, or it's my secondary action, or it's a tertiary action, you could actually save the CSS value that's going to be used. So it might be button hyphen hyphen tertiary hyphen hyphen primary, and that value can be used on the front end while also using a really nice label internally. It might also be used for things like countries. So you might have a list of countries, United Kingdom, but you might want to save ENGB as the value in the CMS. So yeah, that's list field updates. I mentioned earlier we've introduced 2 new resource pickers. So we introduced form resource picking, but also we've added support for content type pickers. And the reason we've done this, we've had a few examples where people have wanted to create components, maybe like a mini listing component that says, I want my mini list to show me news and events and blog posts and 3 of the latest of each of these. Well, at the moment, you'd need to either manually map that in your code in the back end based on a form value, but now you can actually set the content type. So we'll show you a list of content types. You can control which content types are displayed in that content type picker. So you can create these individual components for landing pages based on selecting the appropriate content type. Some other developer niceties. Those of you who've been using the Contensis CLI or started to use the CLI, there's some new support in the CLI. First of all, copying fields in entries. So this sounds really basic, but it's actually a really rich and valuable feature. So in its basic terms, you could take a field that says title and you could copy that into a new field called name as a very basic example. But the real richness comes when you want to convert a type of content into another type of content. So this feature all started from the desire to convert a composer field or a rich text field into a canvas field, which obviously we released last release. So now through the CLI, you can copy a composer into a canvas. So you say, I want a copy field called content page, in the content type of content page, and copy from the composer field into canvas. And by running that command, you'll see all the different entries that will be updated. And then you can commit that change and have the CLI update all of those entries for you automatically. This is going to save huge amounts of time for those people wanting to move from a composer field to a canvas, and offers a real easy way to copy data across different fields. We're also supporting liquid syntax in this as well, so you can add something to the end of a value or before a value before you copy it into a new field. So lots of flexibility. It's all documented in GitHub, and there's lots of help through the CLI as well for hints on how these functions work with the help commands. So give that a look. Not quite released this feature, but we had a really nice demo of this on Monday. You can now compare and understand the changes in content models between your production and development instances as well. So you can see what changes have happened on dev that are not in production and compare those and look to make those changes. So yeah, lots of additions to the CLI. If you haven't started using it, look to install it. We can share the link on Slack, and there's hopefully more documentation such to follow on Contensis.com in the next few months on some use cases. So those are all the updates for 16.1. I'm aware of time, but what's coming up in the future? There's always lots of stuff coming up. So we've been working on an insightful integration to understand how your content is performing from the entry screen. So you'll be able to see the effect that changes that you're making on your latest version versus what's already been published. So that integration is coming for those using Insightful. We plan on transitioning from classic asset management this year, so with the mindset of being able to get an overview of all your assets, understand their usage, understand what's not being used, being able to tag and address those and create some default views on that content to get you managing it. We want to do a lot more with asset management. It's a big piece as a whole, as part of the whole kind of experience platform. But that's an area that we'll be focusing on in 2024. We're also going to be introducing more granular permissions in entries. So the ability to invite collaborators to an individual entry rather than defining them through roles. That's one area. Another area around site view and who can create content and see content on a given path of nodes. So that's something we're going to be looking at. We've also been looking at content review and actually thinking about this in a richer way than we have traditionally. So we want your content to be fresh. We want people to be able to request verification of content at any point of time. So you might have an entry like this, and you can see at the top here in the page header that somebody has requested verification of this content. So it was requested by Dan. It was made to me, and so I'll get notified that there's a verification request. Can you check that this content is all up to date, is all valid? And from there, I could look to say, yeah, I'm happy. Let's validate that for the next 12 months or set a custom date. And after that, getting an overall understanding of your content in your project by introducing a new dashboard to our dashboard screen, where you'll be able to kind of see stuff in a really quick way. So clicking through these large blocks at the top of the dashboard to filter the content that needs to be addressed or not addressed. So yeah, lots of really interesting things coming up over the next couple of months. A group of us are meeting together in the next week or so to define the rest of 2024. So some clarity on these features will flow from those conversations. So if you haven't already, keep an eye out on Contensis Open Roadmap, roadmap.contensis.com. You can see I've started pushing features that are coming soon into there, and there's still a few that are in progress. But yeah, look forward to seeing 16.1 released. If you've got any questions and you want to carry on the conversation, obviously we're always available in Slack, but I can take questions and answers. No, thanks everyone.